thank you for this opportunity to this panel. I'm grateful to the chair of our panel and to Dr. Irina Per for invitation. When at the end of the 18th century, Paisy Velichkovsky wrote down the genealogy of the practice of mental prayer, he did not doubt of its antiquity. He wrote in his chapters on mental prayer of 1770, "Let it be known that this divine work of sacred mental prayer was the unceasing occupation of our God-bearing fathers of antiquity, and in many desert places as well as in Cenobitic monasteries, it shone forth like the sun among mounts, on Mount Sinai, in cities in Egypt, on the Mount Nitria in Jerusalem, and in the monasteries which are about Jerusalem, and in a word, in the entire East, in Constantinople, on Mount Athos, and in the islands of the sea, and in the latest time, by the rise of Christ, in the great Russia too." End of quotation. In fact, the chapters on mental prayer of Paisy Velichkovsky are based mainly on ecumenical hesychasm of the 13th, 15th century. Such names as Nicephore the Hermit, Pseudo Simeon the New Theologian, Gregory Sinaite, Gregory Panama, Saba Isaiah, Callistus, Ignatius Antipoli, Simeon of Thessalonica. We will examine now the teaching of Paisy on this tradition, and particularly focusing on mental prayer and looking for its developments and its roots in early tradition. During his stay on Mount Athos between 1746 and 1763, young Paisy realized that the shortcomings of the old Slavonic translations of the ascetic literature did not permit him to access to a correct text. At the time, his knowledge of Greek language was not enough to enable him to go directly to Greek sources. We have an important source, the letter to Archimandrite Theodosio Maslov of Sophronievo, written in the midst of the 80s of the 18th century, has a reply to the latter's request of patristic translations. Here, Paisy tells his experience of looking for these works. You have to imagine the situation. He was a sort of wanderer monk, as was recently presented in a conference in Paisy by Dr. Anna Briskina. And he started in Kiev, then he was on Mount Athos, but before he was in Moldavia, Moldavia, he met Basil of Boyana Merului, a Ukrainian monk, but he has roots in this land of Romania, in Moldavia. And then he moved on Athos. Then he did not find a spiritual father. He was helped by different monasteries, Bulgarian notably, and he looked for a guide. He has to find a text, and he wanted to find the correct text. This attitude is very modern, it's very philological, it's something that is new in this time. He was also a pupil of the Kievan Academy, so has already a mind formed in this way. And he did not find a spiritual father, and he started with another monk, Mitrofan, and they started to work together. This way, this way of working together needed texts because they did not have a guide, and they started a new way. They restarted the skete life, the skete of anchorites of old, and he found in the text the rules, the way to keep this. When they gathered around him many pupils, many other persons wanting to join his life, he became a sort of leader, elder. And many criticism arose around him, and he has to face this criticism. He was still a young man in the 40s. He has 20, 30 years at the time, and in 1750, when he started his polemics with a monk on Mount Athos, precisely arguing against his practice of prayer, against his new way of life, which is not traditional on Athonite. He was in his 30s. And we have here interesting testimony in the letter to Theological, which Paisy wrote much later when he was already abbot in Nantes, about his search of patristic text. He wandered looking for Greek text, and then he found unexpectedly, with unspeakable joy, the Greek text of different fathers, among whom the method of mental prayer of Simon the theologian and many others. In the skit of St. Basil the Greek, this place is not identified yet, but I will just have a little remark on this point, because in recent research on the prototype of the Philokalia of Nicodemus and Macarius Notaras has been pointed out an important manuscript. We have just reminded by the speaker before me of Lavra 54, but in Skiathos, the monastery of the Annunciation of Skiathos, the Codex 10, that was copied by monk Constantius in 1768-1770. It came from Pantocrator, but in fact, Constantius was one of the Colivades. He was linked to Niphon of Chios, and Niphon of Chios, we know from his life that he established himself in the city of St. Basil. And this manuscript, which was investigated by Peter Van Doon, by Pascalidis, contains the 2/3 of the Philokalia of Macarius and Nicodemus, and 38 works of the 21 authors of the Philokalia. Is this almost the same text, and we know from the life of Macarius that they had contacts with Constantius when he left Athos in early the 70s. So it's very probably that Paisy came around the same text, and he had this text already translated. And the new thing is that he wanted to have an anchorite life, Paisy, with few disciples, with the kind of life of the Hesychast tradition, spiritual father and few disciples, as he read in these books. But it had a huge community of monks. They were at last constrained to leave Mount Athos, and now the passages of this leaving from Athos to Moldavia are more exactly known from new documents found in Kiev by Shumila and others. And it's interesting in his rule of Dragomirna, who is a Cenobitic rule of Paisy, he asked monks that in their cell they should practice this very kind of prayer, activity of the mind. The kind of author he is mentioned is quite interesting. The list starts with a pseudo-Chrysostomical letter. The author is in fact John the Hermit, lived around 1000, which turned to be a sort of manifesto of Jesus' prayer. And apart from ancient fathers, who became a sort of reference canon for the interior prayer, St. Nilus of Sinai, in fact Evagrius, as we have heard, Theological, John the Latter, St. Maximus the Confessor. he has all the other quoted authors of Byzantine hesychasm of the 13th, 15th centuries. So he follows this traditional monastic path, but it was something new. And is it interesting? I will just look at his answer to the criticism he faced on Monastic when he started this new kind of life. This we know from the letter to Afanasi before the 1758. Afanasi charged Paisy that he was not following monastic obligation, and that the use of Greek manuscript was not approved by the church. Although Afanasi did not mention mental prayer behind his accusation, one can easily detect that the model of the skiti life, in whose context was actually possible the practice of mental prayer, was his main point of criticism. It was not by chance that the biographer of Paisy says that his opponent, Afanasi, had blasphemous charge against the holy mental prayer. Afanasi accused Paisy to sit with people and to speak with angels, repeating unceasingly, "Lord of mercy on me." That is sort of full monk, a sort of hygiorhythmic elder. Afanasi here probably either consciously deforms or rather repeats without understanding Elder Basil of Poiana Merului teaching on mental prayer, the teacher of Paisy in Moldavia. In his foreword to Gregory the Sinite, Basil quoted a passage from Gregory's chapter on prayers. Also, our hymn should be angelic as our life conduct. Here, Gregory distinguished between hesychastes and cenobitic monks regarding prayer. Those who search for silence, hesychia, should not sing psalm too much, in order to devote entirely to the prayer by herself, acting in the heart. And Gregory the Sinite wrote in his chapters, God in fact is peace and is beyond confusion and noise. Also our hymn should be angelic as our life conduct and not carnal. Chanting psalm and crying is a symbol of the cry of the mind. End of quote. Commenting on this passage, Basil wrote, Basil Poiana Merului, I quote, "Do not think, pious reader, that the Saint Fathers, as they lead us away from the exterior singing and command to learn the activity of the mind, are blemishing the psalm and the canons. This will not be, for all these things have been given by the Saint Spirit to the Holy Church. But we are not speaking of the rites of the Holy Church, but of what is proper to the rule of every monk, that is, of mental prayer." And of course, this one thing is cenobitic and the rule for cenobitic monks. Another thing is the rule for hesychia. Another word is hesychia. And the originality of Paisy is to join these two things. And he replies to Athanasius just on this line. The anchorites liturgical writings differs from the cenobitic one. The works of Hesychia is distinct from the work of Ecenobium. These are the words of Gregory the Sinite. So Paisy here refers to an ancient tradition, but that came to him through Basil of Poiana Merului, through in Ukrainian legend Ianitsky. He refers explicitly to Nilsorsky, the head of the Russian hesychasm. Paisy wrote other works on mental prayer, always in a polemical context. I will not look through this text, they are well known. The chapters of mental prayer were already quoted, and his last work on hesychast prayer, the letter to Agathon in 1793. I just go to the conclusion. At the end of his career, Paisy was faced to the challenge to publish the Philokalia in Slavic, his translation. Maybe he had already had this translation from the same very text of the Philokalia of Macarius and Nicodemus, but this problem needs more research. In the same letter we quoted at the beginning to Archimandrite Maslov, he refuses to give to his correspondent his translations, because he says they are for eternal use. They should not be given away. There is a danger that people who are not in obedience to elder should practice this kind of prayer, of mental prayer. On the other hand, he has already known about the edition of the Greek Philokalia, so he asked his correspondent Theodosius in the midst of the 80s, please buy this Philokalia, find money, and we will translate again from this text. A printed text has more authority at those times, and he wanted to make this clear. And on the other hand, he has a fear on this possibility to publish the text of Slavonic Philokalia. I quote from his letter. Paisy is frightened and trembling lest they be offered this text as a thing which can be sold, even like other books, and not only to monks but also to all Orthodox Christians, and lest these latter, having studied the work of mental prayer in a self-willed way, without instruction from those who are experienced in it, might fall into deceptions. And Hesychast's prayer is in fact impossible, end of quote, outside monastic obedience to one's spiritual fathers. The books of the Holy Fathers teaching the sobriety of mind are addressed to monks and not to lay people living in the world out of their own free will. This is the strength and beauty of such a prayer, out of art and spiritual melody and spiritual struggle. But it also is its terrifying seriousness, since it radically absorbs the whole being of the person praying, not only one's mouth, but also the depth of one's heart and mind. In the end, Paisy seemed to have overcome his fears, and he received the printed Philokalia and started this translation. These translations, which differ sensibly from the Moscow edition of 1793, are still in the library of Ernst Monastery, are now investigated by Peter Schgun and Igumen Herman, and their publication or their study will shed more light on Paisy legacy and the link also with the Greek Philokalia. Although the Slavic Philokalia was not implemented in the way imagined by Iasi in his letter to Theodosius, its translation constitutes the basis for ascetic renewal in 18th century Russia. The technical features of the psychosomatic method, the art of prayer, were not characteristic of the mainstream spirituality in the Russian Philokalic tradition of the 19th century. However, the disciples of Saint Paisy and the disciples of his disciples in Russia will lead, and also in Romania, will lead not only generations of monks along the path of inner prayer, but also lay people as the hero of the well-known way of a Russian pilgrim. Thank you for attention.